August of 1872 came dry as bone to the high plains west of Abilene, where the land broke into low hills and flat light. The prairie grass rattled in the wind like brittle paper, and the sky stretched too wide to feel safe under. Folks who stayed out there weren't the kind to run from silence. Most had run to it. Caleb Rourke leaned against the wind with a limp that had worsened in the last year, dragging his right leg like something dead behind him. His coat, once gray, now faded to the color of ash, hung open at the collar. Dust clung to the sweat at his throat. The sun pressed down like judgment. He hadn't spoken to a soul in 4 days. The creek had dried up weeks ago, and now the cattle drank from troughs filled by hand, back-breaking slow work. Every morning Caleb rose before the sun and drew water from the last functioning well. He fed the animals. He fixed what was broken. He sat on the porch with a cold tin cup and thought of the sound his wife's voice used to make when she was half asleep and angry. She'd left in March. She took the baby and left the older children behind. There were 6 of them. 2 of the boys, twins, had stopped talking much. The youngest cried for his mother when he thought Caleb was out of earshot. The eldest, a girl of 14, had taken to cooking with silent precision, as if chopping potatoes fine enough might change something. The 2 middle girls stayed quiet as field mice, blinking, waiting for a sound or a storm. Caleb couldn't blame her, not really. Not after what happened with the youngest. He hadn't cried at the burial. Not in front of her. But he'd gone out later that night, stood alone by the fence line with the frozen ground under him, and cursed God out loud. Then he'd cursed himself. He never said sorry, never asked her to stay. There was no one to yell at but the wind and the sky. That morning he saddled the mare and rode toward town. Supplies were low. His hands ached from labor. He was 38 and felt 60. When he reached the end of the pasture fence, he saw movement from the corner of his eye. A child, thin, barefoot, standing by the cottonwood that marked the edge of the dry creek. A girl. Couldn't have been more than 8, maybe 9. Brown hair braided tight. She wore a dress too big for her, patched with different cloths and colors, like someone had stitched it together from scraps. She didn't wave, just stared. Caleb slowed the horse. Something about the way she stood, feet planted, shoulders square, didn't feel like fear. It felt like waiting. He said nothing. She said nothing. The mare shifted beneath him. Caleb tugged the reins and moved on toward town. But even after he passed the rise and the child disappeared from view, her face stayed with him. The flatness of it. Not blank, not lost. Just still. Like someone watching a storm form far off and deciding they'd rather stand in its path than move. By the time he reached the general store, the heat had come up fierce. He tied the mare and stepped inside, nodding at Clara May behind the counter. She said nothing about the circles under his eyes or the weight he'd lost. Just bagged up sugar, flour, and salt. Asked if the boys were still in school, though school had been closed since June. "You getting by?" she asked. He nodded. "I got some extra cloth if your girls want to make dresses." He nodded again, took the sack, paid, and stepped back into the sun. The child was there again. Across the street this time, sitting on the stoop of the abandoned livery stable. Bare feet dangling, arms across her lap. Watching. She didn't follow. She didn't speak. Caleb climbed onto his horse, pulled the hat low over his brow, and rode home slower than he needed to. When he got back, the boys were cutting wood. The youngest clung to the skirt of his sister's dress, and the sun was red above the hills. He did not speak of the girl, but he looked out toward the tree that night, lit a lamp, and left it on the porch. He dreamed of thunder and small hands gripping his coat. The next morning he found her tracks. Small bare prints pressed into the hard dirt near the edge of the corral. She hadn't come all the way to the house. Just stood a while watching, maybe then left before full light. No boot prints, no wagon wheel marks, just that one set of child's feet wandering off into the brittle grass and fading into nowhere. Caleb stared down at them with a weight pressing on his chest. Then he brushed them away with his boot. That afternoon he told the eldest girl, Clara, named not for the storekeeper but his own mother, that he'd be riding out early the next day. Told her to watch the water, mind the chickens, and keep the boys from fighting. She didn't ask why, just nodded, her face like pale stone. He set out before dawn, riding east toward the edge of the territory where the land began to lift into low ridges and thorn scrub. No real destination, just watching, waiting. He passed an old windmill long since broken, then a half-burned homestead he didn't recognize. Coyotes watched him from the rise and didn't run. Near noon he came across a trail of broken mesquite branches, low to the ground, careless steps, as if someone short had passed through without knowing how to cover their trail. He dismounted and followed it, leading the mare by the reins. It took him 3 hours to find her. She was curled beneath a juniper tree, knees to chest, head resting on her arm. Her skin was darker than he'd first thought, sun-browned, with a bruise like a fingerprint blooming on her forearm. She wasn't asleep, just resting. Her eyes were open, and when he stepped on a dry twig she didn't startle. She sat up slow, didn't speak. Caleb squatted a few feet away, winced as his bad leg gave under him. "You hungry?" he asked. She stared. "I got bread," he said. "Dried apples, too. Not much else." Still nothing. But when he unwrapped the cloth and set it between them, she looked down at the food like it was a dream. Her fingers trembled when she reached for the crust. She didn't eat fast. That's what got him. She took each bite like she thought it might be her last for a while. "Where you from?" he asked. The girl chewed, swallowed, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "North," she said. Just that. One word. He nodded. "Got a name?" She looked at him like that was a trick question. "Annie," she said after a long pause. "I think." "You think?" "That's what they called me last." He looked out toward the ridge. The land hummed with cicadas. "Who's they?" She didn't answer. Caleb didn't push. He stood with a grunt, leg aching like a buried knife. "You got folks?" "No." "Where you headed?" "Don't know." She stood too slow, wary. But she didn't back away when he reached for the reins of the mare. He didn't ask if she wanted to come with him. He just started walking. After a moment he heard her fall in behind him, footsteps light but steady. When they reached the horse, he helped her up. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around the saddle horn and held on tight. That night back at the ranch, Clara met them at the porch with a rifle in her hands. She lowered it the moment she saw the child. "I'll sleep in the barn," Caleb said. "You set her up in the front room." Clara didn't argue. Just nodded once, the way her mother used to when something too big to talk about happened. Inside, Annie stood with both hands on the back of a chair as if waiting for permission. The youngest boy crept out from behind the door. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither said a word. Later, as the wind picked up and the air cooled, Caleb lay on the barn floor with his coat for a pillow, staring up into the rafters, thinking of the way Annie's eyes stayed dry, even when she spoke, like tears had been something she'd used up long ago. He did not sleep well. He dreamed of running water, of a child's footprints at the edge of the creek, and of his wife's voice, distant and fading, calling for someone who would never answer. Subscribe and carry the story beyond the horizon. By the end of the week, Annie had found a rhythm. She rose with the sun just like the others. Clara showed her how to fetch water, how to boil oats, how to scrape the soot from the bottom of the cooking pot. The younger children watched her like a hawk the first 2 days, then slowly forgot to. She wasn't loud, but she wasn't afraid either. She moved like someone who'd been on her own long enough to read a room by the way folks shifted their eyes or stirred their coffee. She didn't smile much, not even when the youngest brought her a dried flower he'd found behind the chicken coop. She just took it gently and placed it on the table like something valuable, even though it had already started to fall apart. That afternoon, Caleb found her kneeling by the fence line, mending a gap in the wire with a quiet focus. Her hands were raw. She'd bloodied a knuckle but hadn't come to him about it. He stood a few yards off, watching her work. The wind lifted her braid and pushed the scent of dry grass and rusted metal into his lungs. "You do that before?" he asked. She nodded once. "At the Hayes place. Man, there had goats. You stay there long?" "No." He walked to the fence, leaned on the post she'd just fixed. It was a solid patch, better than the boys would done. "Why'd you leave?" Annie didn't answer right away. She tugged the wire once more, testing it. "They didn't want me." There was no tremble in her voice, no sadness, just fact. Caleb swallowed. He looked past her toward the house. Clara was hanging sheets out to dry, and the wind snapped them like sails. The twins were kicking a ball in the dust, taking turns yelling at each other. It was a scene that weeks ago would felt impossible. Now it was just life again, strange and still broken, but moving forward all the same. "Your folks," he started, then stopped. He wasn't sure what he meant to ask. Where they were, why they left, whether they were still alive. She stood and wiped her hands on her dress. "Don't remember 'em. Just pieces. Hands, maybe. A smell." He nodded, not because he understood, but because he knew the shape of grief when it came quiet. They worked the rest of the day, side by side. She didn't ask to ride the horse, didn't ask for stories, didn't chatter like most children her age might have. She moved with purpose, and he found himself adjusting to her pace without thinking. That night they ate in silence. Caleb fixed the screen door afterward, while Annie sat on the porch steps with the youngest curled up beside her. She let him lean his head on her shoulder. Didn't move even when his thumb found its way to his mouth and he drifted off. Clara stepped out with a blanket and draped it over both of them. "He hasn't done that since Mama left," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. His hands smelled of old wood and oil. He watched Annie, small and still, her gaze on the stars like she expected them to speak. "She say anything about where she came from?" Clara shook her head. "Just helps. Watches everything. Won't touch the pie. She's not used to it yet. She's not like us." "No," he said. "She's not." But then again, neither were they not anymore. Later, when the porch lamp was low and the wind had settled, Caleb stood in the doorway and watched them all sleep. The house was full again in that half-broken way things are when people are doing their best without knowing how. He remembered the ache in his wife's voice the night she packed the baby's things. The way she wouldn't look him in the eye. The words she didn't say about how grief had hollowed him out and made him hard to love. He hadn't fought for her. Hadn't fought for much of anything after the burial. But now, watching this girl, this stranger, fold herself into their life, like she'd always been meant to find them, something in him moved. Not fast. Not all at once. But enough to notice. He stepped outside and sat beside her on the top step. "You're safe here," he said. "Don't owe us anything." She didn't answer, but she leaned a little closer. And for now, that was enough. The weeks turned slow and steady like the wheel of a wagon easing through thick mud. September brought cooler mornings and gold along the cottonwoods by the creek bed. The sky softened at dusk, and the light made everything look cleaner than it really was. The ranch held together with nails, rope, and the sheer will of children too tired to cry and too stubborn to quit. Annie learned fast. She could milk a cow, gut a fish, patch a shirt, and wield a broom like she'd been born to it. The boys stopped flinching when she came near. Clara let her help with bread. They made room for her not because anyone said to, but because it felt natural. Like adding one more log to the fire so it burned steady through the night. Still, she didn't talk much. Caleb watched her carefully in those early hours before the house stirred, catching the way her fingers gripped the table when she thought no one was looking, or how she checked the door latch twice then again. He didn't ask, but he saw it. One morning, as frost laced the edges of the fence posts and the breath of the cattle rose like ghosts in the dawn, Annie stood near the barn, staring into the distance. "You thinking of going?" he asked, coming up behind her. She shook her head. "Just waiting to see if someone's coming after me." She didn't say if that was something she hoped for or feared. "They won't," Caleb said. "If they meant to, they would by now." She nodded slowly, then asked, "If they did, would you send me back?" He looked down at her. Her face didn't have that drawn, haunted look it had when she'd first arrived. There was color in her cheeks now. She still didn't smile easy, but sometimes he caught her humming while sweeping. And once he heard her laugh, a single short burst, when one of the twins slipped in chicken muck. "No," he said after a long silence. "I wouldn't." She didn't say thank you. She just stood a little straighter. Later that day, while repairing the east fence, Caleb let her hold the hammer. She swung it awkwardly, at first gripping too tight. He showed her how to loosen her wrist, how to drive the nail without wasting energy. "I had a brother once," she said out of nowhere. "I think. You remember him?" "No, just his voice. I think he sang. That's worth remembering." Annie didn't respond, but her hands moved with more rhythm after that. They worked until the sun dropped, then rode the mare back to the house together, her small frame riding easy behind him. She didn't hold tight, trusted the balance. That evening, as they ate stew around the table, Caleb found himself watching the children, all 6 of them, including her. There was a quiet kind of peace in the way they bickered and passed bread and spilled salt without apology. He'd forgotten what a full table sounded like. "You ever think of going east?" Annie asked softly. He looked up. "Why?" "Just wondered if people leave here on purpose." He thought for a moment. The idea hadn't come to him in years. "I did once," he said. "Thought I'd go build something. Lay track or farmland that didn't fight so hard. But then my pa died and the ranch fell to me. And then I met her." Annie didn't ask who her was. "She wanted to go," he said. "Said the land was cursed. Said it swallowed things." "Was she right?" He looked around the room at Clara, at the boys, at Annie, who now sat here like she'd never been anywhere else. "I think it only swallows what you don't hold on to," he said. A long silence followed. The lamp on the table flickered once, and outside a lone coyote called into the hills. "You didn't fight for her, did you?" Annie asked. "No." "Why not?" He took a breath. Didn't know how. Annie looked down at her hands. "Maybe you do now." The words landed like a soft blow. Not cruel, not cutting, just true. And maybe that's why later that week he started taking her with him to town. Not just for supplies, for work. Fence contracts, hauling winter prep for the neighbors up near the ridge. Folks looked. Some whispered. No one said anything outright. Not yet. But he felt the air shift. Something was coming. He just didn't know from where. They made it through October with hard work and quiet days. Annie rode with Caleb most mornings now, her boots finally thick enough to hold their own on stirrups. She rarely spoke while they worked, but when she did, it came out sharp and clean, like the swing of an axe. She'd begun to ask questions about horses, about fences, about how to read the clouds for frost. He answered each one like it mattered, because it did. Then word spread a man was asking around in town. Big, rough-voiced, with a scar down his chin, and questions about a girl named Annie. Rode in from the north with a pack horse and 2 guns. Clara heard it from the grocer's daughter. The boy at the feed store saw him too, said he spat chew in the dirt, and looked at folks like they were lying even when they weren't. Caleb didn't tell Annie right away. He came home that evening, sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, and waited for the wind to pick up. Inside, the boys were arguing over a checkerboard. Clara stirred stew. Annie swept the floor in calm circles, same as she always did. He finally told her the next morning. She didn't flinch, just leaned on the doorframe and nodded like she'd been expecting it. "Was it him?" she asked. "I don't know," Caleb said. "Could be." Annie stared out at the hills. "He's not my father." "Not really." "You want to tell me who he is?" She crossed her arms. "He bought me from the woman who took me in. Said it was legal." Caleb's hands tightened on the porch rail. "How long ago?" "Don't know." "Months, maybe. He made me sleep in the barn. Said girls cost less if they're not too pretty." Her voice didn't break. It was flat, like an old board. Caleb breathed slow. "You ran." She nodded. "I took a tin of biscuits. Got maybe 10 miles before the cold hit. Figured I'd freeze before I starved." "You didn't." "No." She looked up at him. "I don't want to go back." "You won't?" "Whoa. You sure?" He looked her dead in the eye. "I'm sure." But the weight of it sat on him all day. He moved through the chores with something burning under his ribs. When he rode into town, he carried the rifle slung across his back. He didn't go to the grocer. He went straight to the sheriff. Tom Ely had been sheriff since the war ended, a man with thick wrists and tired eyes. He listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Tom scratched at his beard and said, "You got proof?" "She was at my gate near Starved Boots falling apart. She's been with us 2 months. You know what kind of shape my kids were in? She ain't different." "That's not proof." Caleb stared at him. "You gonna hand her over?" Tom sighed. "I'm saying, if he's got papers, even fake ones, and you won't let her go, it becomes a lawman's problem. Could drag in more trouble than it's worth." "What would you do?" Tom looked him in the eye. "Hide her." Caleb left without saying more. Rode home hard. When he got there, he found Annie on the roof clearing out the chimney with a broom 3 times her size. She looked down at him like she hadn't just become the center of a storm. He waited till supper, then gathered them all in the front room. "There's a man coming," he said, "and he might think Annie belongs to him. But she doesn't. Not anymore. She's one of us. I want you to understand that." Clara spoke first. "She's been one of us." Annie sat still. Her mouth didn't move, but her eyes did. They flicked toward each of them, measuring maybe or memorizing. "What happens if he tries something?" one of the twins asked. Caleb rested a hand on the rifle beside him. "Then he'll learn this place protects its own." Annie spoke softly. "You'll get in trouble." "Maybe. I don't want anyone else hurt." Caleb looked at her, then really looked at her bony wrists and her quiet, watchful way of carrying herself. At all, she had survived without turning mean. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said. "No," she whispered. "But I'd like to stay." He nodded. "Then you will." That night he sat long on the porch, the rifle across his lap, eyes on the darkness. For the first time in months he hoped someone came, just so he could look them in the eye and make it clear this girl wasn't leaving. Not unless she wanted to. The man came at dusk. Caleb saw the dust before he saw the rider, a slow-moving blot along the horizon where the sun bled orange into the plains. He stood from the porch, rifle already in hand, and didn't move as the horse drew closer. The stranger dismounted without a word. He was thick through the shoulders, with a crooked mouth and skin too red from whiskey and sun. His boots were cracked, and the scar along his jaw pulled his face into a half-sneer. "I'm looking for a girl," he said. Caleb didn't answer. "She'd be about so high." The man held his hand level with his ribs. "Brown braid. Talks quiet. Had a mean streak, though." Caleb studied him. "You law." The man laughed. "Hell no. Just looking to take back what's mine." "She ain't yours." "She was sold legal." "By who?" "Lady up near Fort Wallace. Signed papers and everything." "Don't mean a thing." The man stepped forward. "Look, I ain't here for trouble. Just give her back and I'll be on my way. Don't want to have to involve nobody else." "She's not here. I saw her with you in town." "She's here." Caleb's voice stayed level. "Not anymore." Something in the man's eyes flickered. "You lying." "I am." The man blinked, confused. "So she is here." Caleb raised the rifle just enough. "She's here. And she's not leaving." There was a long silence. Just wind and the creak of the weather vane spinning slow on the barn roof. "You aiming to fight me over some half-wild stray?" the man asked. "No. I'm aiming to end it before it starts." From behind Caleb, the screen door opened. Annie stepped out onto the porch. She wore Clara's old coat, and her boots scuffed and solid. She didn't flinch, didn't tuck behind Caleb, just looked straight at the man like she'd already lived the worst of him and come through the other side. He froze when he saw her. His mouth opened, then closed. "You know I got rights," he said. "You owe me." "I don't owe you nothing," she said. "I fed you. You hit me. I gave you a roof. You locked me in the barn." His voice cracked. "You belong to me." "No," she said. "I belong to myself now." She stepped beside Caleb. Didn't touch him. Didn't have to. The man's shoulders sagged just a little. "Caleb said you should ride on." The man looked at Annie again, but her face was unreadable. "You're gonna regret this," he muttered. "No," Caleb said. "I won't. Whoa." The man turned, got back on his horse, and rode off without another word. They stood in silence until the sound of hooves faded. Then Annie let out a breath. Inside, the others were waiting. Clara had the boys in the kitchen pretending not to listen, but their eyes were wide. "He gone?" one asked. "He's gone," Caleb said. Annie stood beside him, not shaking but pale. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up at him. "I thought I'd feel different." "You do," he said. "You just don't know it yet." Later, she didn't go to bed right away. Instead, she helped Clara fold laundry, then swept the porch again, even though it didn't need it. She moved like someone afraid of what would come once she stopped. Caleb let her. Near midnight, he found her sitting outside, knees tucked up to her chest, staring at the dark. "You were right," she said softly. "He didn't come for me. Not really. Just didn't want to lose." "That's most men," Caleb said. "Don't know how to be without control." She nodded. "He's not the only one." He looked at her. "No, he's not." But he didn't mean her. He meant himself. He meant the part of him that had let grief hollow him out so far he hadn't seen his own children falling apart. The part that let his wife leave without begging her to stay. "You're not like him," she said. He didn't believe it yet, but he wanted to. "Can I stay?" she asked. "You already have." She nodded, then leaned her head lightly against his arm. "Just once. Just long enough." He didn't move. They sat like that for a while, the stars wheeling overhead, the wind quiet, the house full behind them. Winter came early that year. By November's end, the first snow dusted the ridge line, and the mornings froze the water buckets solid. Inside the house, the air filled with the sharp smell of wood smoke and baking bread. The boys gathered close to the stove. Clara stitched new curtains from an old quilt. Annie took to reading aloud in the evenings, her voice small at first, then steady like she was learning her own strength one page at a time. Caleb rebuilt the porch steps. They hadn't needed fixing, not really. But he wanted to shape something with his hands, something that would last. He carved names into the top step, just initials. His own, the children's. He left space for one more, for Annie when she was ready. She'd started calling him Mr. Rourke at first. Now it was just Caleb. Nothing more. No father talk, no questions about what he meant to her or what she meant to him. They didn't need to say it. She was his, he's his. And he was hers. Not by blood, but by choice. That mattered more. One day, not long before Christmas, a neighbor rode up from town with a letter. Caleb opened it slowly, reading each line twice. Clara came to stand beside him, hands flour-dusted, eyes narrowed with worry. "It's from her," Caleb said. "There, Ma." He hadn't heard from her in nearly 10 months. "She's remarried. Says she's sorry." He let the words sit, then folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket of his coat. "You gonna write her back?" Clara asked. Caleb looked toward the barn where Annie and the boys were patching a broken latch. The youngest was laughing loud, open, free. "No," he said. "I'm not." He watched them a while, then stepped off the porch and walked toward the pasture. The wind was sharp, but the sun held a quiet warmth. When Annie saw him coming, she stood brushing straw from her sleeves. He handed her the last piece of the nameplate he'd carved. Just a small block of wood, smooth-edged with a single A burned into the center. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. He let her place it. She knelt, set it into the space he'd left, and pressed her palm against it for a long moment. "You think it'll stay?" she asked. He crouched beside her, joints aching, breath fogging in the cold. "It's got roots now," he said. "So yeah, I think it will." The next day they packed the wagon with extra quilts and jars of preserves. They rode into town together, not for supplies this time, but to help fix up the old schoolhouse. A group of ranchers and their wives had started raising money to open it again, come spring. Annie carried bricks. Caleb repaired the broken door. Clara swept the floor. The twins hauled in firewood and got into a shouting match over who could lift more. At one point, a woman in a blue shawl leaned over and said to Caleb, "She yours?" He looked across the room at Annie, laughing quietly with another girl, her age face smudged with soot, eyes bright. "Yeah," he said. "She is." No one questioned it. That night, as the wind picked up and the stars came sharp against the cold sky, Caleb sat on the porch again, this time not with a rifle, but with a mug of coffee gone lukewarm in his hand. Annie stepped outside and sat beside him, tugging her coat tight. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "I used to think I was done," he said. "Figured life had passed through me and left nothing but bones. And now I think there's more." She nodded. "I want to grow things," she said. "In spring. Flowers. Carrots. Something that wasn't here before." He smiled. "We'll make a garden." She was quiet for a while, then asked, "You think he'll come back?" "No," he said. "And if he does, he won't find what he left." She didn't press. A shooting star burned a line across the sky. She pointed it out, grinning like a child. He followed the arc with his eyes, then looked down at her. "You changed this place," he said. She looked at him. "So did you." In the spring, they would plant things. They would paint the porch. They would go to the schoolhouse as a family, maybe help others do the same. But for now, the fire inside glowed warm. The door creaked open with laughter, and the ranch stood strong under the stars. Not perfect, Not healed, but whole. The road remembers footsteps, subscribe and follow them.